11 Golden Age stars who died from Alzheimer's. They commanded the silver screen with unmatched presence. Their lines became immortalized in film history. Their faces were more recognizable than many world leaders. But in their final years, Hollywood's most towering icons faced an adversary no script could defeat: their own fading minds. Alzheimer's disease, the progressive neurological disorder that slowly erases memory and cognitive function, has claimed some of entertainment's greatest talents, transforming commanding legends into shadows of their former selves. Perhaps the cruelest fate for those who live to be remembered is ultimately not remembering themselves. There's something particularly heartbreaking about Alzheimer's taking a movie star, explained a neurologist who treated several Hollywood legends. These were people whose entire existence was built around their ability to remember lines, convey emotion, and connect with audiences. To have that essence slowly stripped away is a special kind of tragedy. What makes these stories especially poignant is the stark contrast between the immortality these stars achieved on screen and the profoundly human vulnerability they faced in their final chapter. The same faces that will forever remain young and vibrant in classic films gradually became unrecognizable even to themselves. When you've been worshipped by millions, been the focus of endless adoration and attention, what happens when you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror? Asked a longtime Hollywood publicist who witnessed several clients' cognitive decline. What happens when you forget the very films that made you a legend? It's a fall from a height most of us can't even imagine. Some of these beloved figures chose to make their diagnosis public, becoming powerful advocates for Alzheimer's awareness and research. Others retreated from public view, preferring their fans remember them as they were in their prime rather than as victims of a devastating disease. Today, we're exploring the heartbreaking final chapter of 11 Golden Age stars whose brilliant lights were dimmed by Alzheimer's. From the Hollywood icon who brought biblical epics to life but couldn't recall his own legendary performances, to the glamorous love goddess whose decline helped bring national attention to a disease that was poorly understood at the time. Behind the public announcements or carefully managed disappearances lie deeply human stories of courage, family devotion, and the ultimate reminder that even the most seemingly immortal among us face the same fragilities as everyone else. But first, we begin with the towering figure whose very presence defined epic filmmaking, whose commanding voice became instantly recognizable worldwide, and whose decision to publicly announce his diagnosis changed how America viewed Alzheimer's forever.
Modern plays that are as funny as Love Letters is.
Charlton Heston, the epic hero's final battle. For decades, Charlton Heston embodied strength, authority, and larger-than-life heroism. As Moses in the Ten Commandments, he parted the Red Sea with a commanding gesture. As Judah Ben-Hur, he conquered the Roman arena in a legendary chariot race. His performances were monuments to human resolve and dignity, which made the announcement he delivered on August 9, 2002, all the more poignant. My physicians have recently told me I may have a neurological disorder whose symptoms are consistent with Alzheimer's disease, Heston revealed in a recorded statement, his once commanding voice showing signs of the hesitation that would eventually silence it completely. I'm not quite used to the idea yet. With these words, delivered with the same dignity that characterized his greatest roles, the 78-year-old actor demonstrated one final act of heroism, using his celebrity to bring attention to a disease still shrouded in stigma and misunderstanding. He parted the Red Sea on screen, but couldn't part the fog in his final years, noted a neurologist who specializes in Alzheimer's treatment. Heston's decision to announce his diagnosis rather than hide it was genuinely courageous. In 2002, many families were still treating Alzheimer's as a shameful secret. The decline was already evident to those close to him. The actor, who had been famous for his photographic memory, routinely memorizing not just his lines but entire scripts, had begun struggling with basic recall. The commanding presence that had dominated Hollywood for half a century was showing subtle but unmistakable signs of retreat. During his last public appearances, you could see him fighting through the fog, recalled a director who worked with Heston in the late 1990s. He would have moments of perfect clarity where the old Heston would shine through, followed by confusion. But even in decline, he maintained this remarkable dignity. Heston made one final public appearance at the Academy Awards in 2003, receiving a standing ovation from his peers in recognition of both his legendary career and his courage in facing his diagnosis publicly. After that, he largely retreated from public view as the disease progressed. His wife Lydia, his partner for 64 years, became his primary caregiver during his 6-year battle with the disease. In interviews, she described the heartbreak of watching her husband's essence slowly fade, the gradual disappearance of the man behind the iconic face that remained physically recognizable even as his mind deteriorated. On April 5, 2008, Charlton Heston died from pneumonia, a common complication for late-stage Alzheimer's patients. But his legacy extended beyond his filmography. By choosing to announce his diagnosis, Heston helped normalize discussion of a disease that had too long been whispered about rather than openly addressed. The actor who had played so many heroes became one himself in his final role, as an advocate whose fame helped millions of ordinary families feel less alone in their own battles with the same devastating condition. But while Heston's journey with Alzheimer's was public and acknowledged, our next subject's cognitive decline became the subject of speculation, controversy, and ultimately, a new level of awareness about the disease at the highest levels of power.
If we ever decided to go to office.
Ronald Reagan, from silver screen to White House to Alzheimer's advocate. Before he became the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood leading man, appearing in over 50 films during the Golden Age. His easy charm and all-American persona made him a reliable, if not critically acclaimed, presence on screen throughout the 1940s and 50s. Decades later, long after he had transitioned from entertainment to politics, speculation began swirling about his cognitive health during his second presidential term. Though his medical team consistently denied any impairment while he was in office, the announcement that came 5 years after he left the White House cast those denials in a new light. On November 5, 1994, Reagan released a handwritten letter to the American people. I have recently been told that I am one of the millions of Americans who will be afflicted with Alzheimer's disease. I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. With these simple, powerful words, the man once known as the Great Communicator delivered his final public message. The Great Communicator, silenced by disease, remarked a former White House physician. The cruelty of Alzheimer's is that it often attacks the very quality that defined a person. For Reagan, whose gift was communication, losing the ability to articulate his thoughts represented a particularly cruel twist of fate. Reagan's public disclosure transformed Alzheimer's from a medical condition to a national conversation. As the disease progressed, his wife Nancy became a powerful advocate for stem cell research and increased funding for Alzheimer's studies, turning their personal tragedy into a mission for public good. When a beloved former president announces he has Alzheimer's, it changes how people view the disease, explained a researcher at the National Institute on Aging. The stigma diminishes, funding increases. More families feel comfortable seeking help instead of hiding their loved one's condition. Reagan's decade-long decline was largely private. After his diagnosis, he retreated from public view, making his final appearance at his presidential library's dedication in 1994. Nancy and the Reagan family made the deliberate choice to avoid public appearances as his condition deteriorated, preferring that Americans remember him as the vigorous leader he had been. By the final years, according to those close to the family, Reagan no longer recognized his wife or children. The man who had once commanded the world stage had retreated into a silent, unreachable place. When he died on June 5, 2004, at age 93, the nation mourned not just his passing, but the long goodbye that had preceded it, a decade during which his physical presence remained while his essence had gradually slipped away. Reagan's battle with Alzheimer's demonstrated that the disease respects neither fame nor power. Even a man who had once controlled nuclear codes and shaped world history was ultimately vulnerable to its unrelenting progression. While Reagan and Heston brought unprecedented public attention to Alzheimer's through their high-profile diagnoses, our next subject represented the countless talented performers who faced the disease with less fanfare but equal courage.
Judge. So between playing garrulous judges and Santa Clauses.
Burgess Meredith, the versatile character actor's fading finale. Few actors matched Burgess Meredith's versatility. From his heartbreaking portrayal of George in Of Mice and Men, to his scene-stealing role as Mickey in the Rocky films, to his campy, memorable Penguin in the Batman television series, Meredith demonstrated remarkable range across a career spanning 7 decades. His final battle, against both Alzheimer's disease and melanoma, received far less public attention than those of Heston or Reagan, but was no less devastating to those who knew the brilliant character actor. The Penguin couldn't remember his own legacy, said a cast member who worked with Meredith in his later years. It was heartbreaking to witness. This man who could transform completely from role to role was losing his own identity piece by piece. Meredith's condition became apparent to colleagues in the early 1990s, though he continued working until 1995. His last major role came in Grumpy Old Men and its sequel, films whose comedy somewhat masked the cognitive difficulties he was already experiencing on set. He relied increasingly on cue cards and prompt devices, revealed a crew member from his final films. But even with his memory failing, his instincts as a performer remained intact. He could still deliver a line perfectly once he knew what it was. The artist was still there, even as the memory was fading. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Meredith never publicly acknowledged his Alzheimer's diagnosis. His family maintained his privacy throughout his decline, sheltering him from public scrutiny as his condition worsened. When he died on September 9, 1997, at age 89, official statements mentioned his battle with melanoma, but made little reference to his cognitive decline. Like many families dealing with Alzheimer's in that era, there remained a reluctance to discuss the disease openly. What makes Meredith's case particularly poignant was the contrast between his remarkable mental agility throughout his career, his ability to completely inhabit vastly different characters, and the cognitive limitations he faced in his final years. An actor lives in his mind, observed a director who worked with Meredith in the 1980s. His instrument is his memory, his experiences, his ability to transform thought into physical reality. When those faculties begin to fail, it's not just a medical condition, it's the erosion of the very essence of who they are as artists. Meredith's battle with Alzheimer's represents the experience of countless performers whose cognitive decline occurred away from the spotlight, a private struggle shared only with their closest loved ones, rather than with the public who had admired them for decades. While Meredith's final chapter remained largely private, our next subject's experience with dementia became part of her legacy, one of the first major Hollywood stars whose battle with the then poorly understood condition helped bring it to national attention.
Well, no, he got me doing it. Because he loves it.
Rita Hayworth, the love goddess forgotten by her own mind. In the 1940s, Rita Hayworth was the embodiment of glamour and sensuality. Her performance in Gilda, particularly her famous one-glove striptease, created an image so powerful that her pinup was reportedly attached to the atomic bomb tested at Bikini Atoll. As one of Hollywood's greatest stars, she seemed destined to be remembered forever. The cruel irony was that Hayworth herself would ultimately lose all memory of her legendary career. The love goddess, forgotten by her own mind, remarked her daughter, Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, who became her mother's caregiver and eventually a leading Alzheimer's advocate. My mother was diagnosed when Alzheimer's was barely understood. There was almost no support, little research, and enormous stigma. Hayworth's symptoms began appearing in the 1960s, while she was still actively working. Colleagues noticed her struggling with lines, appearing disoriented on set, and displaying uncharacteristic mood swings. These early signs were frequently misattributed to alcoholism, a misconception that delayed proper diagnosis and treatment. People assumed she was drinking, explained a film historian who studied Hayworth's later years. The reality was much more tragic. Her brain was already beginning to fail her, but medical understanding of dementia was so limited that even doctors missed the signs for years. By the early 1970s, Hayworth's condition had deteriorated to the point where she could no longer work. Her formal diagnosis finally came in 1980, one of the first times Alzheimer's was identified in a major celebrity. The announcement stunned Hollywood and created new public awareness of a disease that had received little attention. Rita's case changed everything, noted a neurologist specializing in geriatric medicine. When someone as glamorous and famous as Hayworth could be affected, it forced people to recognize that Alzheimer's wasn't just confusion in the elderly, it was a devastating neurological disease that could strike even the most vibrant individuals. The final years of Hayworth's life were spent in increasing isolation as she became unable to recognize friends, family members, or even her own image in her famous films. By the time of her death in 1987 at age 68, she had been in care for several years, completely detached from the world that had once adored her. The publicity surrounding Hayworth's condition helped launch the Alzheimer's Association and other advocacy organizations. Her daughter Yasmin established the annual Rita Hayworth Galas, which have raised over $80 million for Alzheimer's research, ensuring that although the disease took Hayworth's memories, her legacy would include helping others fighting the same battle. My mother's greatest contribution might not be her films, but what her illness taught us about Alzheimer's, Yasmin Aga Khan has often noted. She helped bring this disease out of the shadows. While Hayworth's diagnosis helped establish public awareness of Alzheimer's, our next subject's experience demonstrates how the disease affects not just the patient, but entire families, including those in the public eye.
You see, the first show was 2 hours. All the others are an hour and a half. I think the first show was the best show we ever did.
Peter Falk, when Columbo couldn't solve his final mystery. For millions of television viewers, Peter Falk was inseparable from his most famous character, the seemingly disheveled but brilliantly perceptive Detective Columbo, whose disarming demeanor masked a mind that missed nothing. The role, which Falk played for 35 years, made him one of television's most beloved figures. The cruel irony of his final years was that the actor who portrayed television's greatest detective ultimately faced a mystery his remarkable mind couldn't solve, his own deteriorating cognitive function. Even Columbo couldn't solve the mystery of memory loss, observed a neurologist who specializes in dementia care. Falk's decline was particularly poignant because the character he embodied represented the pinnacle of mental sharpness, the man who noticed everything, remembered everything, and put all the pieces together. Falk's cognitive issues became apparent to family members in the early 2000s, though his decline was kept private for several years. By 2008, his condition had deteriorated significantly, leading to a public guardianship case that revealed the extent of his impairment. Court documents filed by his adopted daughter Catherine stated that Falk could no longer recognize familiar people, places, or things, and needed full-time custodial care. The filing revealed that the actor, then 81, no longer remembered Columbo, the character that had defined his career. "It's devastating when someone forgets their own legacy," remarked a longtime friend of Falk's. This was a man who had won Emmys, been nominated for Oscars, created one of television's most iconic characters, and it was all gone, erased from his mind, while the rest of the world still celebrated his work. Falk's case became further complicated by family disputes over his care, a situation tragically common among families dealing with Alzheimer's. His second wife, Shara, and his adopted daughter, Catherine, became entangled in legal battles over guardianship and visitation rights, adding public legal struggles to the private medical challenges. These family conflicts highlighted an often overlooked aspect of Alzheimer's: how the disease strains relationships and forces difficult decisions about care, legal authority, and quality of life. Even with financial resources and medical access that most families lack, the emotional challenges remained overwhelming. Falk died on June 23, 2011, at age 83, after several years of advanced dementia. While his iconic character will forever be associated with mental brilliance, his personal legacy includes highlighting the vulnerability of even the sharpest minds to degenerative disease. "There's something profoundly human about Falk's story," noted a gerontologist familiar with his case. Columbo never lost at his own game, but Peter Falk, like every other Alzheimer's patient, couldn't outsmart the disease. It reminds us that behind every character is a person facing the same human fragilities as everyone else. While Falk's cognitive decline became publicly known through legal proceedings, our next subject made a conscious choice to keep his diagnosis private, preferring to protect the joyful legacy he had created.
Between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. You filthy, rotten, yellow son of a bitch! We are...
Gene Wilder, the man who kept his diagnosis private to preserve the magic. Few actors brought as much genuine wonder and joy to the screen as Gene Wilder. As Willy Wonka, he created a character that continues to enchant generation after generation. In collaborations with Mel Brooks like Young Frankenstein, he delivered performances of incomparable comic genius. His gentle, wide-eyed persona made him uniquely beloved, which is precisely why he made the deliberate choice to keep his Alzheimer's diagnosis private until after his death. He kept it private so we would remember him as he was, explained his nephew, Jordan Walker Perlman, in a statement released after Wilder's passing in 2016. The decision to wait until this time to disclose his condition wasn't vanity, but more so that the countless young children that would smile or call out to him, "There's Willy Wonka," would not have to be then exposed to an adult referencing illness or trouble. This thoughtful approach reflected Wilder's lifelong consideration for his audience, particularly the children who knew him primarily as the magical chocolate factory owner. While he could have used his celebrity to raise awareness for Alzheimer's research, he chose instead to protect the joy his work had brought to millions. Wilder was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2013, but continued to recognize those closest to him and maintain his gentle personality until shortly before his death. According to his family, he never lost his essential Gene Wilderness, the sweet, gentle quality that had made him so beloved on screen. He simply chose not to force people to confront his illness, noted a close friend. He didn't want the image of a confused Gene Wilder to replace the vibrant character he had spent decades creating in the public imagination. It was a final gift to his fans. While chronologically Wilder falls slightly outside the traditional golden age of Hollywood, his connection to that era through his work with classic comedians and his embodiment of its timeless appeal make his inclusion in this list appropriate. His case also highlights the very personal decisions each diagnosed individual must make about privacy versus advocacy. "There's no right answer," explained a medical ethicist who has studied how public figures manage terminal diagnoses. "Some choose to become advocates, using their celebrity to drive research funding and public awareness. Others, like Wilder, choose to protect their legacy and spare their fans the pain of watching their decline. Both approaches deserve respect." Wilder's 3-year battle with Alzheimer's ended on August 29, 2016, when he died from complications of the disease at age 83. Because of his choice to keep his diagnosis private, the public experienced his passing as a sudden shock rather than the culmination of a long goodbye, exactly as he had intended. "It was his final performance, in a way," observed a film critic who had followed Wilder's career. "He managed his exit with the same thoughtfulness he brought to every role, considering the audience's experience above all else." While our first subjects were household names whose battles with Alzheimer's received significant attention, our next Golden Age figure represents the many character actors whose contributions were vital to classic films, but whose declining health occurred largely out of the spotlight.
A dead infant was found, wrapped in newspaper in the basement.
You really roused my appetite.
Maurice Evans. From Shakespeare to science fiction to silence. For serious theater lovers, Maurice Evans was one of the foremost Shakespearean actors of his generation. For television audiences, he was the charming witch doctor Maurice on Bewitched, and for science fiction fans, he was the orangutan Dr. Zaius in Planet of the Apes, roles that demonstrated his remarkable versatility across genres and media. His battle with Alzheimer's disease, however, took place largely away from public view, representing the experience of many supporting actors whose declining health attracted little attention despite their significant contributions to film history. "Shakespeare's man in Hollywood, undone by silence," noted a theater historian who knew Evans in his later years. "It was particularly cruel for a man whose command of language, whose ability to bring Shakespeare's most complex verses to vibrant life, had been his defining professional gift." Evans' cognitive decline began in the early 1980s, following a career that had spanned theater, film, and television. Though he had never married and had no children, friends and colleagues rallied around him as his condition deteriorated, ensuring he received proper care. Unlike the more famous stars on our list, Evans's diagnosis received little public attention. His retreat from acting was noted primarily in theater circles rather than mainstream media, highlighting how differently cognitive decline is treated depending on a performer's level of celebrity. For every Charlton Heston whose Alzheimer's becomes national news, there are dozens of accomplished actors like Evans whose battles remain private, explained a geriatric specialist who has treated several aging performers. The disease doesn't discriminate based on billing position or fame, but public attention certainly does. By the late 1980s, Evans' once remarkable facility with complex language had deteriorated to the point where basic communication became challenging. The actor who had once delivered Hamlet's soliloquies with unmatched eloquence struggled to form simple sentences. He died on March 12, 1989, at age 87, with Alzheimer's listed among the contributing factors. His obituaries focused primarily on his theatrical accomplishments and film roles rather than his final illness, perhaps as he would have preferred. Evans's case represents the more common experience of Alzheimer's, a private struggle rather than a public disclosure. affecting not just the most famous stars, but the essential character actors who gave depth to classic films and whose contributions deserve to be remembered even as their own memories faded. While most of our subjects faced Alzheimer's in their 70s or 80s, our next Golden Age figure encountered the disease at a much younger age, highlighting that dementia isn't exclusively a disease of the very elderly.
Make your bed.
Ma. What you doing to my gun, Mom?
Estelle Getty, The Golden Girls' Private Battle. In one of Hollywood's great ironies, Estelle Getty became famous playing a character much older than herself. As Sophia Petrillo on The Golden Girls, Getty, then in her early 60s, portrayed an 80-something mother with a razor-sharp wit and impeccable comic timing, wearing aging makeup and a white wig to appear older than she actually was. The cruel twist came when Getty, years before reaching Sophia's chronological age, began experiencing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease while still working on the show. She made millions laugh and forgot them all, remarked a neurologist specializing in early-onset dementia. Getty's case highlights an important reality about Alzheimer's. It doesn't always wait for advanced age. Symptoms can begin in the 60s or even earlier, making diagnosis more challenging because healthcare providers often aren't looking for it in younger patients. While Getty's primary fame came from television, she had a lengthy career in films stretching back to the 1970s, connecting her to the extended golden age of Hollywood. Her cognitive issues became apparent to castmates in the early 1990s, as she increasingly struggled with lines she had once delivered flawlessly. It was heartbreaking to watch, recalled a crew member from The Golden Girls. She would panic before tapings, terrified she wouldn't remember her dialogue. The woman who played this sharp-tongued, quick-witted character was losing her own mental acuity, and she was aware enough to be frightened by it. Getty's diagnosis came in 2000, after several years of symptoms that had initially been misdiagnosed as stage fright or stress. By then, she had retreated from public life, unable to make appearances or give interviews as her condition progressed. Her family described her battle as a horrifying private battle, one made more difficult by the contrast between the mentally sharp character she had portrayed and her own declining cognitive function. The public knew her as this feisty, mentally acute character who always had the perfect comeback, explained a friend of the family. The reality of her final years couldn't have been more different. That disconnect made accepting her condition even harder for those who loved her. Getty died on July 22, 2008, just 3 days before her 85th birthday, after years of advanced dementia. The announcement of Alzheimer's as her cause of death surprised many fans who had been unaware of her condition, a reflection of her family's success in protecting her privacy during her illness. Her legacy includes not just her unforgettable performances, but also raising awareness about Alzheimer's potential to affect people before advanced age. An important reminder that cognitive symptoms in younger seniors should be taken seriously rather than dismissed as normal aging. While Getty's battle with early-onset Alzheimer's remained largely private, our next subject's experience with dementia became a powerful case study in how the disease affects one of humanity's most fundamental capacities, the ability to create and appreciate art.
You know, Mr. Wilkerson, we're going to be neighbors for a long time. It's up to you whether or not we live in peace. I came here to stop this killing before it went any further.
Glenn Ford, Hollywood's everyman lost in time. For over 4 decades, Glenn Ford embodied reliable American masculinity on screen. From film noir classics like Gilda, to westerns like 3, to Yuma, to domestic dramas like The Blackboard Jungle, Ford projected a distinctive everyman quality that made him one of Hollywood's most consistent leading men. His battle with Alzheimer's disease in his final years provided a stark contrast to the capable, decisive characters he had portrayed throughout his career. Hollywood's everyman, lost in time, observed a film historian who had interviewed Ford in his healthier years. There was something particularly poignant about watching someone who had represented such steady competence on screen gradually lose his ability to manage everyday tasks. Ford's cognitive decline became apparent to family and friends in the early 1990s, though it progressed relatively slowly. Unlike some Alzheimer's patients who experience rapid deterioration, Ford's condition developed over more than a decade, allowing him occasional periods of clarity even as his overall function diminished. His son Peter became his primary caregiver, providing a level of personal care that highlighted the disease's impact not just on patients, but on their families. In interviews after his father's death, Peter Ford spoke candidly about the challenges of watching a parent transform into someone requiring constant supervision and assistance. "It's a strange reversal," Peter Ford told a reporter. "You grow up with this larger-than-life figure who represented strength and wisdom to you, and suddenly you're reminding him to eat or helping him dress. It fundamentally alters the parent-child relationship in ways that are difficult to process." Glenn Ford's final public appearance came at his 90th birthday celebration in 2006, a carefully managed event where his frailty was evident, but where he still demonstrated moments of recognition and connection with longtime friends and colleagues. Shortly afterward, his health declined more rapidly. He died on August 30th, 2006, at age 90. While his obituaries mentioned his long battle with Alzheimer's, they focused primarily on his remarkable film career, his 87 movies, and his status as one of the most reliable box office draws of his era. Ford's experience with Alzheimer's highlights how the disease's progression can vary significantly between individuals. While some patients decline rapidly within a few years of diagnosis, others like Ford may experience a more gradual deterioration spanning a decade or more, creating different challenges for caregivers and different experiences for the patients themselves. Our next subject's battle with dementia further demonstrates this variability in disease progression, while also raising questions about diagnosis and disclosure in one of Hollywood's longest-lived legends.
That handled the film then. No one spotted that but Alma.
Norman Lloyd, the century-long life with an uncertain end. When Norman Lloyd died in 2021 at the remarkable age of 106, he had witnessed virtually the entire history of American cinema, from silence to streaming. His career stretched from Orson Welles' Mercury Theater in the 1930s through Hitchcock classics like Saboteur to modern films like Dead Poets Society and beyond. His final years, however, raised complex questions about aging, cognitive decline, and the sometimes blurry line between normal changes in elderly cognition and diagnosable dementia. He outlived them all, but the memories didn't, noted a geriatric specialist who studies extremely elderly patients. Lloyd's case demonstrates the challenges of assessing cognitive health in the very old. When someone reaches their late 90s or beyond, determining what constitutes normal cognitive aging versus pathological decline becomes increasingly difficult. Unlike most subjects on our list, Lloyd never received a formal public diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. However, those who knew him in his final years reported significant cognitive changes consistent with dementia, including memory loss, confusion, and periods of disorientation that went beyond typical aging. Alzheimer's not always confirmed, but widely suspected, explained a close associate who visited Lloyd regularly in his final years. By his early 100s, he had good days where glimpses of his sharp wit and remarkable memory shone through, and other days where he seemed lost in time, unable to recognize people he had known for decades. What makes Lloyd's case particularly interesting is how his extreme longevity affected perceptions of his cognitive state. When someone reaches their hundreds, certain degree of memory loss or confusion is often accepted as normal, potentially masking or minimizing recognition of more serious conditions like Alzheimer's. There's a tendency to say, well, he's 103, of course he's a bit confused, noted the geriatric specialist. This can lead to underdiagnosis or undertreatment of legitimate neurological conditions in the extremely elderly. Even doctors sometimes fall into this trap. Lloyd remained occasionally active in the entertainment industry past his 100th birthday, though his appearances became increasingly rare and carefully managed. His last screen appearance came at age 100 in the 2015 comedy Trainwreck, a remarkable testament to his endurance even as his cognitive abilities were declining. Whether or not Lloyd had diagnosable Alzheimer's or another form of dementia remains uncertain. What is clear is that even his extraordinary longevity and lifelong mental activity, factors often associated with reduced risk of dementia, couldn't completely protect him from cognitive decline in his final years. His case reminds us that while lifestyle factors may delay or reduce the risk of dementia, they don't provide immunity, a sobering reality even for someone who maintained creative engagement for over a century. Our final subject brings us back to one of Hollywood's most versatile character actresses, whose experience with Alzheimer's remained largely private until after her passing.
Why are they staring so?
You look like Venus emerging from an emerald sea.
Paulette Goddard. Chaplin's leading lady fades away. With her vivacious presence and remarkable adaptability, Paulette Goddard transitioned successfully from silent films to talkies, from comedies with Charlie Chaplin to dramatic roles in films like The Women. Her romantic relationships with Chaplin, Burgess Meredith, and Eric Maria Remarque kept her in the headlines, while her performances established her as one of Hollywood's most versatile actresses. Her final years, however, were spent in increasing isolation as Alzheimer's disease gradually diminished the vibrant personality that had defined her public image. Chaplin's muse faded into memory, observed a film historian who studied Goddard's career. There's a special poignancy to her case because she had been so thoroughly independent and self-directed throughout her life. To lose that autonomy must have been particularly devastating for someone with her forceful personality. Goddard's cognitive decline began in the late 1980s, when she was in her late 70s. Having retired from acting decades earlier and living quietly in Switzerland, her condition remained largely unknown to the public, with only her closest friends aware of her deteriorating health. Rumored late-stage Alzheimer's in later years, noted a biographer who researched Goddard's final period. She had deliberately withdrawn from public life long before her cognitive issues began, which made it easier to keep her condition private. The woman who had once been among Hollywood's most photographed stars spent her final years completely out of the spotlight. By the time of her death in 1990, at age 79, Goddard had been experiencing significant cognitive impairment for several years. While heart failure was listed as her primary cause of death, Alzheimer's was included as a contributing factor, one of the first official acknowledgments of her condition. What makes Goddard's case notable is how it reflects the experience of many Golden Age figures whose battles with Alzheimer's occurred before the disease was widely discussed or understood. In the 1980s, when Goddard's symptoms began, Alzheimer's was still frequently misdiagnosed, misunderstood, or simply not discussed publicly. Her generation approached illness differently, explained her biographer. There wasn't the same tradition of celebrities publicly discussing their health challenges. Cognitive decline in particular was often hidden away, treated as something shameful rather than as the medical condition we now understand it to be. Goddard's experience represents countless patients of her era whose Alzheimer's remained undiagnosed or unnamed, referred to euphemistically as senility, or simply accepted as an inevitable part of aging rather than as a specific disease process requiring specialized care and treatment.